The research ship Harmony's light drifted slowly through the empty space around Kepler 442. Dr. Veltar pressed his crystalline hand against the viewing window and watched the ancient planet below. His people, the Zephyrians, had lived for thousands of years among the stars, but this dead world held secrets that excited him. "Another boring rock," Commander Thex said from behind him. The tall Altarian officer stood with his arms crossed. His blue skin looked darker in the ship's soft lighting. "I don't understand why the Council sent a military escort for this." Dr. Veltar turned away from the window. His crystal body caught the light and threw rainbows across the wall. "This planet once held a great civilization, Commander. They built cities that reached into the clouds. Then something destroyed them all. We need to understand what happened." The research ship carried 12 different alien species. Scientists, archaeologists, and explorers from across the galaxy worked together. They had been studying the dead planet for 3 weeks. Everything seemed normal and peaceful. Commander Thex walked to the main display screen. It showed the ship's location and the empty space around them. "My sensors show nothing dangerous. No enemy ships, no threats. Just empty space and dead rocks." "That's what makes this interesting," Dr. Veltar said. He moved to his workstation where hundreds of data files waited. "A civilization this advanced doesn't just disappear. Something killed them all." In the ship's lower levels, other scientists worked at their own projects. Krina, an insect-like researcher from the hive worlds, studied soil samples from the planet. Her 6 arms moved quickly over different instruments. The samples showed traces of something strange, something that had burned through organic matter at the molecular level. "Dr. Veltar," she called through the ship's communication system. "You need to see this. The soil samples show evidence of bioweapons, very advanced ones." Dr. Veltar was about to respond when the ship's alarm system started screaming. Red lights flashed throughout the corridors. Commander Thex ran to his tactical station and his face went pale. "Massive contacts dropping out of hyperspace," he shouted. "Unknown ship designs, they're huge." On the main screen, space itself seemed to tear open. Dark shapes emerged from the rips in reality. These were not metal ships like the ones built by civilized races. These looked like living things. Massive, pulsing creatures that moved through space like they were swimming through water. "By the 7 suns," whispered one of the other scientists. "What are those things?" The creatures were the size of small moons. Their skin looked wet and black. Long tentacles reached out from their bodies like the arms of giant spiders. But worst of all, they were covered in smaller moving shapes. Thousands of them crawled across the surface of each giant creature. "Devourer swarm," Commander Thex said in a voice barely above a whisper. "I've heard stories. They consume entire worlds, eat every living thing they find." More of the bioships appeared. First 10, then 50, then hundreds. They filled the space around Kepler 442 like a dark cloud. The Harmony's light looked like a small fish surrounded by hungry sharks. "All crew to emergency stations," Commander Thex announced over the ship's speakers. "This is not a drill. Hostile forces are approaching." Dr. Veltar felt fear creep up his crystal spine. The Devourer swarm was a nightmare from ancient stories. No one had seen them for over 1,000 years. Most people thought they were just legends used to frighten children. The bioships moved toward the research vessel. They didn't fly like normal ships. They twisted and turned like living snakes. Green liquid dripped from openings along their sides. Where the liquid touched empty space, it seemed to eat the very light around it. "Shields up," Commander Thex ordered. "Charge all weapons." The Harmony's light was built for research, not war. Its shields were designed to protect against radiation and space debris. Its weapons were small defensive systems meant to destroy asteroids. Against the Devourer swarm, they were useless. The first bioship reached them and attached itself to the hull. The sound echoed through the corridors like fingernails on metal. Then came a horrible hissing noise as acid began eating through their outer armor. "Hull breach on Deck 7, reported the ship's computer in a calm voice that seemed wrong for such a terrible moment. "Hull breach on Deck 5. Hull breach on Deck 3. Green smoke filled the corridors. Crew members ran in all directions. Some carried emergency equipment. Others just ran, trying to escape the acid that burned through everything it touched. Dr. Veltar grabbed Commander Thex by the arm. "The communication array. We need to send a distress signal." "To who?" Commander Thex asked. "We're 800 light-years from the nearest Council fleet. By the time help arrives, we'll be dead and digested." "We have to try," Dr. Veltar said. "Other ships might be closer. Someone might hear us. They ran through corridors filled with smoke and the sound of melting metal. Behind them, they could hear new sounds, clicking noises, scratching. The Devourers were inside the ship now. The communication center was on the bridge. They made it just as the first Devourer broke through the wall behind them. It looked like a giant insect crossed with a spider. Its mouth had too many teeth, and its eyes glowed with hungry intelligence. Commander Thex fired his sidearm at the creature. The energy blast hit it in the center of its body. The Devourer just looked annoyed. It opened its mouth wider and made a sound like breaking glass. Dr. Veltar reached the communication console. His crystal fingers moved quickly over the controls. He opened every communication channel the ship had. Long range, short range, emergency frequencies, everything. "This is research vessel Harmony's Light," he spoke into the transmitter. "We are under attack by Devourer swarm forces at the Kepler 442 system. 12 different species aboard. We have wounded. We need immediate assistance. Please respond." More Devourers broke through the walls. They moved fast and seemed to know exactly where the crew members were hiding. Commander Thex kept firing, but his weapon had little effect. The creatures just kept coming. "Any ship that can hear this message," Dr. Veltar continued broadcasting. "This is an emergency. The Devourer swarm has returned. They will not stop. With us. Please help." A Devourer grabbed Commander Thex and lifted him off the ground. The officer screamed as acid began eating through his uniform. Dr. Veltar kept transmitting even as other creatures surrounded him. "Kepler 442 system," he said one more time. 12 species aboard, please. Anyone. The transmission cut to static as acid destroyed the communication equipment. Then came screams and the sound of tearing metal. 800 light-years away, on a small human monitoring station at the edge of known space, Lieutenant Sarah Chen sat at her desk drinking coffee. The night shift was usually quiet. Most of the galaxy slept during these hours. The distress signal came through weak and broken. Lieutenant Chen almost missed it, but something in the voice made her stop and listen. Fear. Real, desperate fear. She recorded the message and played it back. Devourer swarm. 12 species. People dying far from home with no one to help them. Lieutenant Chen had been in the human military for 6 years. She had seen war and death and suffering. But this was different. These were scientists and explorers, innocent people who just wanted to learn about the universe. She didn't hesitate. She forwarded the message to Human Fleet Command with her own note attached. "People are dying out there. We need to respond." Then she sat back in her chair and wondered if anyone would care enough to help strangers from another part of the galaxy. In her experience, most civilizations only cared about themselves. But humans were different, at least she hoped they were. Admiral Marcus Kane stood in the command center of Terra Station and stared at the holographic display. The message from Lieutenant Chen played for the third time. Static mixed with desperate voices calling for help from a place called Kepler 442. 800 light-years, said Captain Elena Vasquez. She stood beside the Admiral with her arms crossed. "That's far beyond our patrol routes, far beyond anyone's patrol routes." Admiral Kane was 57 years old and had spent his entire adult life in the human military. He had fought pirates in the outer colonies and defended merchant ships from raiders, but he had never faced anything like this. "What do we know about the Devourer swarm?" he asked his intelligence officer. Lieutenant Commander Park pulled up files on the main screen. "Ancient enemy. They appeared about 2,000 years ago and consumed entire star systems. The combined fleets of 12 different civilizations finally drove them into dark space. Most people think they died out there." "But they didn't, Admiral," Kane said. "Apparently not, sir." The Admiral walked around the holographic display. It showed the position of every human ship in their fleet. Cruisers, destroyers, carriers, support vessels. 847 ships in total, the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. "Sir," Captain Vasquez said carefully, "this is not our sector, not our responsibility. We have treaties with 6 different alien governments, but none of them include mutual defense clauses." Admiral Kane nodded. He understood the politics. Humans were still new to the galactic community. Most alien races saw them as dangerous primitives from a death world. Earth's gravity was twice normal. Its weather could kill. Its animals hunted in packs. Humans had evolved to survive conditions that would destroy most civilized species. Have any other fleets responded to the distress call? He asked. Lieutenant Commander Park checked his communications board. Negative, sir. The Centauri received the message but classified it as outside their area of operations. The Andromedans ran probability calculations and determined the rescue mission had a less than 3% chance of success. The Altarians... He paused. What about the Altarians? They received the message 4 hours ago. They sent a response saying they would consider military action if the Devourer swarm threatened their territory directly. Admiral Kane felt anger rise in his chest. 12 different species were dying 800 light-years away, and the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were too busy calculating odds and protecting their own borders to help. What about the Council itself? The Galactic Council is in session debating the appropriate response. Current estimates suggest they will reach a decision in 6 to 8 weeks. Captain Vasquez stepped closer to the Admiral. Sir, I know what you're thinking, but this is suicide. We don't know how many enemy ships we're facing, we don't know their capabilities, and even if we win, we'll be so far from home that any survivors will take months to return. Admiral Kane studied the star charts again. The route to Kepler 442 would take them through empty space. No supply depots, no friendly ports, no backup if things went wrong. Captain, what's the crew status on the fleet? All ships report ready. For deployment, sir. Crews are rested and supplies are full. And morale? Captain Vasquez smiled slightly. Hi, sir. Word about the distress call has spread through the fleet. The crews are asking when we leave, not if. That was the difference, Admiral Kane realized. Other species calculated probabilities and measured costs. Humans heard people calling for help and asked when they could leave to answer. All department heads to the briefing room, he announced. We're going to war. 20 minutes later, the command staff of the 3rd Fleet sat around a large table. Marine General Patricia Williams, the fleet's ground forces commander. Admiral Sarah Torres, who controlled the carrier groups. Commander David Kim from engineering. Each of them had received copies of the distress call. I'll be direct, Admiral Kane said. This is a volunteer mission. Any ship commander who wants to stay behind can do so with no consequences. This is beyond our normal duties. General Williams leaned forward. Sir, with respect, what kind of military would we be if we ignored people calling for help? A practical one, Commander Kim said. We could lose half the fleet, maybe more. Or we could save 12 different species and show the galaxy what humans stand for, Admiral Torres added. Admiral Kane looked around the table. These were the best military minds humanity had produced. They understood tactics and strategy and the cost of war. But they also understood something the other galactic civilizations had forgotten. The decision is made, Admiral Kane said. All available ships will deploy to Kepler 442. We leave in 6 hours. The room exploded into activity. Officers began planning fuel requirements and supply needs. Marine commanders discussed boarding actions and ground assaults. Engineering teams calculated hyperspace jump coordinates. Word spread through the fleet within minutes. On 847 different ships, human crews began preparing for the longest military deployment in their species' history. Captain Maria Santos was loading supplies onto her freighter Lucky Strike when she heard the news. Her ship was not part of the military fleet, but she had been trading with the Navy for years. She knew most of the officers personally. She called Admiral Kane's office directly. This is Captain Santos. I want to volunteer my ship for the mission. Captain, this is a military operation. You're a civilian. So are the people who sent that distress call, sir. Besides, you might need cargo capacity for supplies and wounded. Admiral Kane was quiet for a moment. Then, do you understand the risks? I understand that people are dying and no one else is helping them. Report to Dock 7 for military equipment installation. Welcome to the fleet, Captain. Similar calls came in from across human space. Mining ships volunteered to serve as scouts. Passenger liners offered to carry wounded. Even small personal craft wanted to join the mission. By the time the fleet was ready to depart, over 900 ships had assembled at Terra Station. The largest human force ever gathered floated in formation around the massive space dock. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of his flagship, the dreadnought Indomitable. Through the viewing windows, he could see ships stretching to the horizon. Destroyers and cruisers mixed with converted civilian vessels. All of them crewed by volunteers heading into the unknown to help strangers. Sir, Captain Vasquez said, from her position at the tactical station, we're receiving communication requests from several alien governments. Put them through. The first was from the Altarian ambassador. His blue face appeared on the main screen with the expression of confusion. Admiral Kane, our sensors show massive fleet movements in your sector. Are you planning military action? We're responding to a distress call, Ambassador, the one your government chose to ignore. Admiral, you must understand. These are not your people. The creatures calling for help are strangers to your species. You have no obligation to risk your lives for them. Admiral Kane looked at the fleet assembled outside his ship. Hundreds of vessels crewed by humans who had volunteered to fly into danger for people they had never met. Ambassador, that's where you're wrong. When someone calls for help, they become our people. That's what makes us human. The transmission ended and Admiral Kane turned to his crew. All ships, prepare for hyperspace jump. Destination, Kepler 442. Sir, the navigation officer called out. Jump calculations complete. Fleet reports ready. Take us out. The space around Terra Station filled with light as 912 ships opened hyperspace windows and disappeared into the unknown. Behind them, alien observers watched in amazement. The primitive humans from the Death World had just launched the largest rescue mission in galactic history. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Kane studied the sensor readings from their destination. Long-range scans showed massive energy, signatures around Kepler 442. Whatever they were flying into, it was big. Time to destination, he asked. 18 hours at maximum hyperspace velocity, sir. 18 hours to reach people who might already be dead. 18 hours to face an enemy that had once threatened the entire galaxy. 18 hours to prove that humanity belonged among the stars. Admiral Kane settled into his command chair and began planning for battle. Behind him, the largest human fleet in history raced through hyperspace toward a distant system where strangers were calling for help. And for the first time in 1,000 years, someone was actually coming to answer. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system and faced a nightmare. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of her destroyer Defiant and stared at the tactical display in horror. Mother of God, she whispered. The space around Kepler 442 crawled with bioships. Hundreds of massive living vessels moved through the system like a swarm of insects. Each one was the size of a small moon, covered in writhing tentacles and dripping with acidic fluids. They pulsed with their own internal light, like giant hearts beating in the darkness of space. Contact report. Admiral Kane's voice came over the communication system. All ships report what you see. This is Captain Rodriguez on the Santiago, came the first response. I count over 2,000 hostile contacts. They're feeding on something near the fourth planet. Captain Vasquez adjusted her sensors and zoomed in on the area Captain Rodriguez had mentioned. Her blood ran cold. The research ship Harmony's light floated dead in space, partially dissolved by acid. Devourer bioships attached to it like parasites, slowly consuming the metal hull and everything inside. Admiral, she called over the fleet communication channel. The research vessel is still intact, partially. There might be survivors. I see it, Captain. All ships, battle stations, this is what we came for. The Devourer swarm noticed the human fleet immediately. Bioships throughout the system began turning toward the new arrivals. They moved with liquid grace, not like mechanical vessels, but like living predators sensing fresh prey. Admiral Kane's voice echoed through every ship in the fleet. All vessels, this is Admiral Kane. We are facing an enemy that has destroyed civilizations and consumed entire worlds. They do not negotiate. They do not show mercy. They only hunger. But today, they learn something new. They learn what happens when they threaten innocent people and humans hear about it. The first wave of Devourer bioships approached the human fleet. They were massive creatures, each one easily 3 times the size of humanity's largest dreadnought. Green acid dripped from openings along their sides. Smaller organisms crawled across their surfaces like living weapons. Enemy contacts closing to weapons range, reported the tactical officer on the Indomitable. All ships weapons free, Admiral Kane ordered. Show them what a death world teaches its children. The battle began with a flash of light that could be seen across the entire system. Human ships opened fire with every weapon they carried. Railguns launched metal slugs at incredible velocity. Missile pods released swarms of guided warheads. Energy weapons carved lines of destruction through the void, but the Devourers were not helpless prey. Their bioships returned fire with weapons that defied understanding. Streams of acid that ate through armor and hull plating. Energy beams that seemed to drain power from anything they touched. And worst of all, they launched thousands of smaller organisms that swarmed toward the human ships like living missiles. Captain Vasquez watched her tactical display as the two fleets collided. All weapons, fire at will. Point defense systems, priority on the small contacts. The Defiance gun spoke with mechanical precision. Her railgun fired every 3 seconds, sending metal slugs through the bodies of attacking organisms. Her missile batteries released clouds of warheads that exploded among the enemy like deadly fireworks. But for every organism they destroyed, 10 more took its place. The Devourers seemed endless. "Captain," her weapons officer called out. "We're running low on ammunition for the point defense guns. Switch to emergency reserves, keep firing." On the heavy cruiser Marathon, the crew faced a different problem. 3 bioships had surrounded their vessel and were trying to attach themselves to the hull. Captain Robert Stone watched through his bridge cameras as acid began eating through his outer armor. "All hands prepare for boarding action," he announced over the ship's communication system. "Marines to defensive positions. This is not a drill." The first breach came on Deck 7. Green acid dissolved a hole large enough for the devourer organisms to pour through. They looked like giant insects crossed with spiders, each one the size of a small car. Their mouths had too many teeth, and their eyes glowed with predatory intelligence. Marine. Sergeant Thomas Rodriguez led his squad into the breach zone. He had fought pirates and raiders, but never anything like this. The creatures moved fast and seemed to feel no pain. When his rifle fire hit them, they just kept coming. "Contact front," he yelled into his radio. "Multiple hostiles in the corridor. They're big and they're mean." The first devourer organism lunged at him with claws extended. Rodriguez dodged to the side and emptied his rifle into the creature's body. It stumbled, but didn't fall. Instead, it turned toward him with what looked like curiosity. "They're studying us," Rodriguez realized. "Learning how we fight." But the creatures had never faced humans before. They didn't understand what it meant to fight something that had evolved on a death world. Rodriguez drew his combat knife and a grenade from his belt. "Come on then," he growled. "Let's see how you like Earth-style close combat." He pulled the pin from the grenade and rushed the nearest organism. The creature tried to grab him with its claws, but Rodriguez was already inside its reach. He drove his knife into what looked like a vital spot and wedged the live grenade into the wound. The explosion killed the organism and wounded 2 others. Rodriguez's squad used the confusion to advance, firing as they moved. They fought with a brutality that shocked even themselves, using tactics bred into them by centuries of warfare on humanity's hostile homeworld. Throughout the fleet, similar battles raged as devourer organisms boarded human ships. But they quickly learned that boarding a human vessel was very different from attacking the ships of more civilized species. On the carrier Yorktown, Admiral Sarah Torres watched as her fighter squadrons engaged the smaller devourer organisms in space combat. Human pilots flew with an unpredictability that confused the enemy. Instead of neat formations and textbook maneuvers, they darted and weaved like angry wasps. "Blue Squadron, this is Control. Enemy contacts at your 2 o'clock. Copy, Control. We see them. They're ugly." The human fighters dove into the swarm of organisms with a reckless courage that would have horrified other species. Pilot Lieutenant Amy Chen rolled her fighter through a cluster of enemies and fired her guns at point-blank range. When her ammunition ran out, she used her ship's mass as a weapon, ramming organisms that got too close. "Control. This is Blue 7. I'm out of missiles and low on gun ammo. Request permission for ramming attacks." "Negative, Blue 7. Return to base for resupply." "But Control, there are still enemies out here." "That's an order, Lieutenant. We need our pilots alive." But even as individual battles raged across the fleet, the larger situation grew desperate. The human ships were outnumbered 4-1. For every devourer bioship they destroyed, 2 more appeared from deeper in the system. Captain Vasquez studied her damage reports and grimaced. The Defiant had taken hits to her engines and weapon systems. Half her crew was fighting fires or repairing battle damage, and they hadn't even reached the research vessel yet. "Admiral," she called over the command frequency, "we need to get to that research ship soon. My sensors show its hull integrity is failing." "Understood, Captain. All ships, new priority target. The research vessel Harmony's Light. We're going to punch through their lines and get our people out." The human fleet began to reorganize itself around a single objective. Instead of fighting a general battle across the entire system, they focused their attack on the area around the damaged research ship. Destroyers and cruisers formed a spearhead while the larger vessels provided covering fire. It was a tactic born from humanity's experience fighting on their deadly homeworld. When facing superior numbers, you didn't try to win everywhere at once. You picked the most important objective and threw everything you had at it. The Devourers recognized the change in human tactics and responded accordingly. More bioships, moved to defend the area around the research vessel. They formed layers of defense using their own bodies to shield the ships that were feeding on the Harmony's light. "This is going to be rough," Captain Vasquez told her crew. "We're going in fast and hard, prepare for maximum acceleration." The human spearhead accelerated toward the research vessel at speeds that would have been impossible for most species to survive. Human bodies evolved under heavy gravity could handle forces that would crush more delicate aliens. As they approached the Harmony's light, Captain Vasquez could see the extent of the damage. The research ship looked like a half-dissolved skeleton. Acid had eaten through much of its hull, leaving only the central core sections intact, but her sensors also detected something else. Life signs, weak and scattered but definitely present. "Admiral," she transmitted. "There are survivors aboard that ship, at least 12 separate life signs in the central core area." "Copy that, Captain. Get us close enough for extraction. All ships, cover the rescue operation." The human fleet threw itself at the Devourer defenses with desperate courage. Ships took terrible damage to clear a path to the research vessel. The destroyer Braveheart rammed straight through a bio-ship twice its size, both vessels exploding in a ball of fire and acid. Captain Vasquez pushed the Defiant toward the Harmony's light while enemy fire tore through her shields. Captain Elena Vasquez gripped her command chair as the Defiant shook under enemy fire. Green acid splashed across her bridge windows, eating through the reinforced glass like water through paper. Her ship was dying around her, but they were almost close enough to the research vessel. "Distance to target?" she shouted over the sound of failing systems. 200 meters and closing, her helmsman reported. Blood ran down his face from a head wound, but his hands remained steady on the controls. "All stop. Prepare for docking." Maneuver. The Defiant slammed into the docking bay of the Harmony's light with enough force to weld the two ships together. Metal screamed against metal as the destroyer's hull crumpled, but the connection held. "Marines, go! Go! Go!" "Captain," Vasquez ordered. Colonel James Mitchell led the rescue team through the breach between the two ships. He was a veteran of 20 years in the human military, but nothing had prepared him for what he saw inside the research vessel. The corridors of the Harmony's light looked like something from a nightmare. Acid had eaten through walls and floors, leaving holes that opened into space. The air itself seemed poisonous, filled with green vapor that burned his throat even through his environmental suit. "Spread out," he told his Marines. "Life signs are coming from the central core. Watch for hostiles." They moved through the dying ship like ghosts, stepping carefully around pools of acid that still bubbled and ate through the deck plating. Behind them, more Devourer organisms poured through holes in the hull, hunting for any survivors. Private Johnson, the youngest member of the squad, spotted movement in a side corridor. "Contact left," he whispered into his radio. 3 Devourer organisms crept toward them, moving with the patience of natural predators. They had learned from their encounters with human Marines, and now moved more carefully, trying to surround their prey. Colonel Mitchell made hand signals to his team. They had trained for this kind of close combat in the ruins of Earth cities, fighting simulation battles in environments too dangerous for most species to even visit. The engagement lasted 30 seconds. When it was over, 3 dead organisms lay in the corridor and the Marines continued their advance. Private Johnson had taken a claw across his chest armor, but the wound wasn't serious. "Tough bastards," he muttered, checking his rifle. "Not as tough as us," Colonel Mitchell replied. They found the survivors in what had once been the ship's main laboratory. 12 aliens from different species huddled together in the center of the room, surrounded by makeshift barriers of furniture and equipment. They looked up with desperate hope when the Marines appeared. Dr. Veltar was the first to speak. His crystalline body was cracked in several places, and his normally bright glow had dimmed to barely visible. "Are you real?" he whispered in perfect Galactic standard. Colonel Mitchell removed his helmet so the aliens could see his face. "Real as it gets, Doc. We're here to get you out." Commander Thex, the Altarian officer, stared at the human Marines in amazement. "Your people came. Your people actually came for us." "When someone calls for help, we answer," Colonel Mitchell said simply. "Now let's move. This ship won't hold together much longer." The rescue became a running battle through the collapsing corridors of the research vessel. Colonel Mitchell's Marines formed a protective circle around the alien survivors, fighting off Devourer organisms while guiding their charges toward the docking bay. The creatures seemed to sense that their prey was escaping. More and more of them poured through the holes in the ship's hull, attacking with desperate hunger. But they had never faced humans who were protecting something they cared about. When a massive devourer warrior blocked the main corridor, Private Johnson didn't hesitate. He tackled the creature while holding a live grenade, using his own body to shield the others from the explosion. His sacrifice gave the group time to escape through a side passage. Dr. Veltar watched the young human die and felt something break inside his chest. These beings, these primitive Deathworlders, were dying to save people they had never met, species they had no obligation to protect. Why? He asked Colonel Mitchell as they ran. Why are your people doing this for us? Because it's the right thing to do, the colonel replied without slowing down. They reached the docking bay just as the structure began to collapse. Acid had eaten through the main support beams, and the Harmony's light was finally breaking apart. Colonel Mitchell pushed the alien survivors through the airlock connecting the two ships. Move, 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 this whole section is coming down. The last Marine made it through just as the research vessel's hull gave way completely. What remained of the Harmony's light broke into pieces that drifted away into space, consumed by acid and time. On the bridge of the Defiant, Captain Vasquez felt the impact as debris struck her ship. Damage report. Hull breaches on 3 decks, her engineering officer called out. We're venting atmosphere and losing power to the engines. Can we make it back to the fleet? Not under our own power, ma'am. Captain Vasquez keyed her radio. Admiral Kane, this is Defiant. We have the survivors, but my ship is critically damaged. Request immediate assistance. Admiral Kane's voice came back strong and clear. Help is on the way, Captain. You did good work. The heavy cruiser Texas moved in to provide escort, its guns blazing as it cleared away attacking organisms. Behind it came the medical ship Mercy, ready to receive the wounded survivors. As the rescue ships approached, Dr. Veltar found himself on the bridge of the Defiant, watching the battle that raged around them. Human ships fought with a coordination and ferocity that amazed him. When one vessel was damaged, others moved to protect it. When ammunition ran low, supply ships darted through enemy fire to provide resupply. I don't understand your species, he told Captain Vasquez. Every military analysis says this mission should have been impossible. You are outnumbered. You are far from home. You have no strategic advantage. Captain Vasquez wiped blood from a cut on her forehead and smiled. You're thinking like a civilized person, Doc. We're not civilized. We're from a death world. We don't calculate odds when people need help. We just go help them. Commander Thex, the Altarian officer, moved closer to the viewing window. He could see human ships throughout the battle zone, fighting with desperate courage against impossible odds. Some were clearly damaged beyond repair, but their crews kept fighting. Your government will demand explanations for this, he said. Your people will question why you risked so much for strangers. Maybe some will, Captain Vasquez admitted. But most will understand. This is what we do. This is who we are. The medical ship Mercy docked with the Defiant and began transferring the alien survivors. Dr. Veltar was the last to leave, reluctant to abandon the humans who had saved his life. What happens now? He asked Colonel Mitchell. Now we finish what we started, the Marine replied. We make sure these things can never hurt anyone else. As Dr. Veltar was carried to the medical bay, he looked back at the human Marines who had rescued him. They were already preparing for their next mission, checking weapons and planning new attacks. These beings from the death world fought not for glory or conquest, but for something much simpler and much more powerful. They fought because it was right. Meanwhile, throughout the Kepler 442 system, the battle continued to rage. The human fleet had successfully rescued the survivors, but the Devourer swarm was still massive and dangerous. Thousands of bioships remained, and they were learning to adapt to human tactics. Admiral Kane studied the tactical display on his flagship and made calculations of his own. His fleet had taken heavy casualties. Ammunition was running low. Several ships were too damaged to continue fighting, but the mission wasn't complete. The Devourers had to be stopped here, or they would spread to other systems. Other worlds would face what the research vessel had endured. All ships, he announced over the fleet communication channel. Phase 2 begins now. We're going to finish this. The human fleet began to reorganize itself for the final assault. Ships that couldn't fight anymore moved to the rear to protect the medical vessels carrying the rescued aliens. The remaining combat ships formed new attack formations. But even as they prepared for the final battle, Admiral Kane received an unexpected message. Long-range sensors detected new ships approaching the system. Not human vessels, and not Devourer. Bioships, sir, his communication officer reported. We're receiving a transmission from the approaching ships. They're civilian vessels, from multiple species. Put it through. A familiar voice came over the speakers. It was Captain Maria Santos from the converted freighter Lucky Strike, but she wasn't alone anymore. Admiral Kane, this is Captain Santos. I brought some friends. Seems word got out about what we're doing here. Half the civilian ships in 3 sectors want to join the fight. Admiral Kane looked at his tactical display again. The new contacts weren't military vessels. They were cargo haulers, passenger liners, mining ships, even small personal craft. All of them converted for combat and crewed by volunteers. Captain Santos, this is a military operation. These people aren't trained for combat. Maybe not, sir, but they heard people calling for help, and they heard that humans were the only ones answering. They want to be part of that. The Admiral looked around, his bridge at the faces of his crew. The final battle for Kepler 442 began when Captain Maria Santos led her fleet of converted civilian ships into the heart of the Devourer swarm. Her freighter Lucky Strike had been modified with military weapons, but she was still just a cargo hauler facing creatures that had once terrorized the galaxy. All civilian vessels, she announced over the radio. Remember, we're not trying to be heroes, we're just giving the military ships cover while they do the real work. But the Devourers didn't see any difference between military and civilian targets. To them, all humans looked like the same dangerous predators that had been tearing through their forces for hours. A massive bioship, larger than anything they had faced before, emerged from the swarm's center. It was easily 10 times the size of Admiral Kane's flagship, covered in weapons that pulsed with organic energy. The creature's hide was scarred from thousands of years of battle, and its eyes glowed with ancient intelligence. "My God," whispered someone on the fleet communication channel. "It's a queen." Admiral Kane had read about Devourer queens in the old military reports. They were the intelligence behind the swarm, capable of coordinating thousands of bioships across multiple star systems. No human had ever seen one before. Most people weren't sure they really existed. "All ships," Admiral Kane commanded from the bridge of the Indomitable. "New primary target, the large bioship at coordinates 77 Mark 9. Everything we have, concentrate fire." The human fleet turned its weapons on the Queen. Railguns fired metal slugs at incredible velocity. Missile batteries released their remaining warheads. Energy weapons carved lines of destruction across the creature's hide. The Queen barely seemed to notice. Its skin absorbed the impacts and sealed any wounds within seconds. This was a creature that had survived battles with the combined fleets of 12 different civilizations. Human weapons, impressive as they were, could not match the firepower of an entire galactic alliance. But the Queen made a mistake. It underestimated what humans would do when conventional weapons failed. "Sir," Captain Vasquez called from the damaged Defiant. "I have an idea. It's crazy, but it might work." "I'm listening, Captain." "Ramming speed. We take the Defiant straight into that thing's center mass. My ship is already critically damaged. We can't make it home anyway." Admiral Kane was quiet for a moment. The Defiant carried over 200 crew members. Good people who had volunteered to risk their lives for strangers. "Captain, there has to be another way." "Negative, sir. Look at our tactical situation. We're running out of ammunition. Half our ships are damaged. That Queen is calling in more bioships from across the system. If we don't stop it now, we never will." Admiral Kane looked around his bridge. His officers were watching him, waiting for orders. These were decisions that would be studied in military academies for generations. The first human contact with an ancient enemy. The moment that would define humanity's role in the galaxy. "Captain Vasquez," he said finally, "evacuate your crew to other ships. Prepare your vessel for unmanned ramming attack." "Negative, sir. Someone needs to fly the ship to make sure we hit the target. The Defiant is my responsibility." Before Admiral Kane could respond, other voices joined the conversation. "This is Captain Rodriguez on the Santiago. My engines are already failing. I volunteer for ramming duty." "Captain Stone on the Marathon. We've lost main power and life support is failing. Request permission to ram." "This is the Braveheart. Half our crew is already dead. Let us make it count for something." One by one, the commanders of damaged human ships volunteered for suicide missions. Not because they wanted to die, but because they understood that sometimes death was the price of protecting others. Admiral Kane felt something break inside his chest. These were the finest officers humanity had ever produced, and they were ready to sacrifice themselves for people they had never met. "All ships," he announced. "Belay ramming orders. We find another way." but Captain Vasquez was already accelerating toward the Queen. "Sorry, Admiral. Sometimes a captain has to make her own decisions." The Defiant raced toward the massive bioship at maximum velocity. Devourer organisms swarmed around it trying to stop the attack, but the destroyer's remaining guns cleared a path through the smaller enemies. Captain Vasquez stood on her bridge and watched the Queen grow larger in her viewing screen. Her ship shook as enemy fire tore through the hull, but the engines kept running. Her crew remained at their stations, maintaining course and speed even as death approached. "Ma'am," her helmsman said quietly, "it's been an honor serving with you." "The honor was mine," she replied. The Defiant struck the Devourer Queen at full velocity and disappeared in a ball of fire and acid. For a moment it seemed like the sacrifice had been meaningless. The Queen was too large, too powerful to be destroyed by a single ship. But then something unexpected happened. The Queen began to convulse, its massive body writhing in apparent pain. The impact had done more than physical damage. It had disrupted the creature's connection to the rest of the swarm. Throughout the system, Devourer bioships suddenly stopped their coordinated attacks. They drifted in confusion, no longer receiving orders from their central intelligence. The swarm that had operated as a single, terrifying organism became thousands of individual creatures, each acting independently. "All ships," Admiral Kane announced. "The Queen is wounded. Press the attack." The human fleet threw itself at the confused Devourers with renewed fury. Ships that had been barely holding together found new strength. Crews that had been exhausted discovered fresh energy. They were fighting not just for the alien survivors, but for Captain Vasquez and all the others who had given their lives. The battle turned into a rout. Without the Queen's coordination, the Devourer bioships became easy targets. They tried to retreat, but human ships pursued them to the edge of the system. Some escaped into hyperspace, but most were destroyed. When the last enemy vessel fled or died, and strange silence fell over the Kepler 442 system, the space that had been filled with battle and death became peaceful again. Admiral Kane stood in his command center and surveyed the cost. 43 human ships had been destroyed. Over 2,000 of his people were dead. The fleet that had been humanity's pride was reduced to wreckage and survivors, but 12 alien beings were alive because of their sacrifice. 12 strangers who had called for help and received an answer. "Sir," his communication officer reported, "we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. News of the battle is spreading." Admiral Kane listened to the messages flooding in. Some were from human colonies praising the fleet's courage. Others came from alien governments, expressing amazement at humanity's actions. A few were from species that had never contacted humans before, asking questions about their motives. But the message that mattered most came from Dr. Veltar, now recovering in the medical bay of a human ship. "Admiral Kane," the crystalline alien said through the communication system, "I am sending a full report of these events to the Galactic Council. Every species needs to know what happened here, what your people did for strangers." "We did what anyone would do, Doctor." "No, Admiral, that is where you are wrong. We sent distress calls to every major civilization in the galaxy. They all had reasons not to help. Only humans heard people calling for help and came running." The fleet began its long journey home, carrying wounded survivors and stories that would reshape galactic civilization. As they traveled through hyperspace, Admiral Kane received regular updates on the political situation. The Altarian government had issued a formal apology for not responding to the distress call. The Andromedans were revising their probability calculations about human behavior. The Galactic Council was calling for emergency sessions to discuss humanity's role in galactic defense. But perhaps the most important change was in the small monitoring stations scattered throughout human space. Young officers like Lieutenant Sarah Chen found themselves receiving messages from alien species, asking for help with problems their own governments wouldn't address. Pirates threatening a remote colony. Natural disasters on worlds too poor to afford proper rescue equipment. Missing ships in dangerous regions of space. One by one, these requests found their way to human military commanders, who heard them and asked the same question Admiral Kane had asked. When people call for help, what do? The answer was always the same. We go help them. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler 442, Dr. Veltar stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Council and delivered his final report. His crystalline form had healed, but the memory of human sacrifice remained, bright in his mind. Honored delegates, he began. I have witnessed the future of galactic civilization. It walks on two legs, carries weapons that can destroy worlds, and has mercy that can save them. The humans did not calculate odds before launching their rescue mission. They did not debate costs or measure strategic advantages. They heard people calling for help, and they came. Not because they had to. Not because it benefited them. But because it was right. I submit to this council that humanity represents something we have lost in our pursuit of civilization. They remind us that true advancement is not measured by technology or age, but by the willingness to sacrifice for others. Even strangers. Even enemies.